Okay, so I guess we can start, guys. So welcome everybody to this PhD talk, and thank you for being here. Again, for those who were not here last time, I remind you that starting from this semester, we will ask you to fill this table just with your name and following email. And this is just done to keep trace of the people attending the seminars in order to nominate at the end of the semester the popular jury who will evaluate the presentations. As you know, you will be asked to evaluate the presentations according to two criteria: originality of the content and communication effectiveness. Now, I will just introduce today's speaker, who is Giuseppe Cecere. Giuseppe is a PhD candidate from the 37th PhD cycle, in the Infrastructure and Environmental Engineering program. And today he will talk about the role of social hotspot analysis in waste management. And now, without further ado, I just leave the floor to Giuseppe.
Thank you, Chiara. Sorry if I stay seated, but otherwise I cannot read on the screen. So, good afternoon, everyone. Today I will introduce you a bit on the role of the social hotspot analysis in the evaluation of sustainability when we are talking about waste management. This is the content that today we will see together: a bit introduction about life cycle thinking, some information about what is a life cycle sustainability assessment, the role of social LCA inside the life cycle sustainability assessment, and then some first results that we have on the social hotspot analysis. Starting with life cycle thinking, I want just to give you a recap of what we talk when we talk about life cycle thinking. So we're talking about closing the loop of production. So the idea is to closing the loop through the recovery, the reuse, and the recycling of materials. The transition between the circular economy and the linear economy is made basically of these three steps. But we need to remember that when we speak about life cycle thinking, we are not just evaluating impact on the environment, because sustainability usually refers to environment. But actually, when we are talking of sustainable decision, we are also talking about society and economy. Otherwise, we are only talking about environmental sustainability. So the life cycle thinking is the perspective to see the problem, the way in which we are evaluating the impact through the entire life cycle, considering the three different dimensions, so the society, the environment, and the economy. One of the main things about life cycle thinking is that when we are evaluating, for example, through analysis of the life cycle, the impacts, we do not want to have problems related to the burden shifting. So we do not want to shift the environmental impacts, for example, in social impacts, or the economic impacts in environmental impacts. The idea is that when we are analyzing the life cycle of product, starting from the cradle to the grave, or the cradle to the cradle, we need to understand which limits of our system are in order to understand where the impacts are allocated. In this way, we could ensure that we are not shifting the impacts through the different dimension of the sustainability or the different processes inside the product chain. And this is the macro level that usually refers when we are talking to life cycle thinking approach. We also have a micro level that is very important when we are talking about, for example, enterprises, that is the possibility to give answer to entrepreneurs in order to understand which impact and which choices are more sustainable. Let's speak about life cycle sustainability assessment. I decided to take this quote from the document is called Toward the Life Cycle Sustainability Assessment of 2012. That is the main document about life cycle sustainability assessment. That says that life cycle sustainability assessment refers to the evaluation of the environmental, social, and economic negative impacts and benefits in decision-making processes toward more sustainable products throughout the entire life cycle. So, we are talking about methodology that refers to the entire life cycles, and differently from, for example, the LCA, the idea in life cycle sustainability assessment is to find a way where we evaluate environmental impact, but also social and economic impact. So the methodology is a tool in order to evaluate the strong sustainability of systems, production chains, and products. As I was saying, the idea is to evaluate the three pillars of the sustainability, so the economic pillar, the social pillar, and the environmental pillar. So we have three different methodologies for this. We have life cycle costing, LCC. We have life cycle assessment, or environmental life cycle assessment. And we have social life cycle assessment. The idea is to put together all the results in a methodology that is called the life cycle sustainability assessment. So the possibility related to the methodology and the advantages of implementing this type of methodology is that this kind of methodology gives us an idea on the possible trade-off between the three different dimensions of the sustainability. We also give to enterprises a full spectrum of the impact associated with the production and services, and we also will also increase the awareness, because of course when we produce this kind of analysis, enterprises have the idea on which part of their processes are the ones that have the highest impact. Differently, for example, from the LCA, we have also the possibility to understand where the impact relates to the environmental part, the dimension, on the social dimension, or the economic dimension. The methodology, of course, will support decision makers in order to understand better what is sustainability in general and which impacts are related to the different dimensions. Our first question about the methodology was, of course, what is the state of the art? We have the latest document that is published by the UNEP, that is the Towards Life Cycle Sustainability Assessment, that is from 2012. And we have some European projects going on in order to understand how it is possible to develop the methodology and apply it to real case studies. The other question was if there's an upward trend regarding the application to the waste field, because of course, when we are talking about the waste sector, we are talking a specific sector that have related problems when we are talking about life cycle assessment application and also life cycle thinking methodology related. Of course, the first idea and the more important is how to apply life cycle sustainability assessment to waste management. This is the picture that, in my idea, gives you a bit the idea on the degree of the development of the methodology. We have life cycle assessment that is standardized. We have an ISO standard. We have more than an ISO standard for LCA, and we have a lot of case studies that give us a lot of information on how to apply the methodology. This is almost the same is the case for life cycle costing, even if we do not have yet standardization, and the range of application is very limited, but we have still some case studies very important, and also we know how to apply the methodology at least. When we are speaking about social life cycle assessment, and even worse, when we are speaking about life cycle sustainability assessment, for the social life cycle assessment, we have guidelines. We still miss an ISO standard, but we know that it's under development an ISO standard for the methodology, and we hope that in the next 2 years it will be published. But when we speak about life cycle sustainability assessment, actually we have a lot of problems related on how to put together all the results in order to keep the three-dimension representative, but also a final number or a final indicator to communicate to entrepreneurs. So as you can see, if we want to apply the methodology, we need to evaluate the gap in the development of the methodology in order to understand where and how to intervene inside the methodological developments and also the application. And we decided to start with the social life cycle assessment. This is just to recall you the criticalities. We have discrepancies between the three methodologies. Of course, like the life cycle assessment, the time required and the data required for the study are a lot. So usually this is the most important step in order to understand if the methodology could be easily applied, depending on the time and on the data required. We miss a standardization of life cycle sustainability assessment, and we have very few case studies on the application of social life cycle assessment to the waste management sector. Usually, we have just few indicators that try to represent a bit the possible impact that we will have in the waste management sector. So let's speak about the social LCA issues. As I was saying, social LCA is the biggest of the three methodology with the highest gap inside the application. And we could say that the methodology refers to the ISO standard 14040, that is the ISO standard related to the environmental life cycle assessment. So it is composed of the main phases of the LCA, so the goal and scope definition, the social life cycle inventory, the social life cycle impact assessment, and the interpretation. The methodology took from the sisters, from the LCA, also the iterative procedure of the application, so we could start with the goal and scope definition, and then when we have the first results, we could go back and check if the goal and scope are respected or if we have to proceed and recalibrate the definition of the initial study. So as I was saying, the methodology is similar for some cases with the LCA. We have the same framework, we have large amount of data required, we have the definition of the inventory related to the definition of the functional unit, and of course the iterative procedure of the methodology. But we have still very important difficulties, differences. The first one is that social LCA have a different field of application, and the first things that come in mind is that we need to define the subject of the study. The subject of the study for social LCA are stakeholders, and we will see in a few slides which stakeholders we want to evaluate, and in order to understand the different impact. Differently from the LCA, when we are evaluating social impacts, we also refer to qualitative data, not only to quantitative data. This is important to stress out because otherwise, if we want to quantify every data about the social impacts, sometimes we could make some mistakes, really. I've seen a lot of problems related to the quantification of indicators, and sometimes the best answer is to find a way to reproduce the qualitative data and insert it as a qualitative data and not a quantified data. Another biggest difference is that with social life cycle assessment, we are also evaluating positive impact, and in LCA instead, we are evaluating only negative impacts. I will give you an idea on the structure of the methodology because it's a bit different from the LCA. So we start with the stakeholder category. The first that comes to our minds is workers. For workers, for example, we could assess the impact on the impact categories. For example, the human rights, the working condition, and the health and safety. These are macro area in which we could evaluate the impact, but to understand the methodology better, we need to evaluate the subcategories. Subcategories are specific social themes that we will see in the next slides that assess the impact categories. Then, through the subcategories, we have inventory indicators that gives us information on the subcategories and, of course, inventory data. So the structure of the methodology is this one. We have different subcategories for different stakeholders, and for each subcategory, we have different indicators and data. This is the general scheme that we have from the UNEP SETA guidelines, and you could see here on the left, in your case, the different subcategories for each stakeholders. So, for example, for workers, what is a stakeholder subcategories? For example, freedom of association and collective bargaining, or if there's the presence of child labor, there's the salary is equal, is fair, and the amount of working hours, for example. As you can see, the number of subcategories, considering that, for example, in LCA we have 18 indicators. In the case of social LCA, we have 14 subcategories, and each subcategories could be assessed through the use of different indicators. So the number of subcategories is really high. Let's make an example. So, for example, let's say that we want to assess the impact on workers through the impact category of human rights. We could assess, for example, one of the subcategories that is the presence of the equal opportunities and discrimination inside a specific company. And we could use several indicators, like the presence of policies on equal opportunities, or the total number of incidents of discrimination and action taken, the composition of governance bodies and employees, and the ratio of basic salary of men to women in employee category. Of course, for these indicators, we could have several data that we could take, for example, from the review of enterprise-specific reports. For example, if there's presence of CSR and also corporate social responsibility actions inside the company, we have reports every year from the company that try to assess what they do internally in order to understand the social impacts. We could also have some interviews with human resource and management of the companies, because of course they know how the enterprises is working on the team. Going back to the subcategory definition, we have that as we were seeing the number of subcategories really high. So the question is it possible to analyze all subcategories for each stakeholders? Yes, of course it is, but the time required, the data, and the resources are really high. So we started from this understanding in order to develop our study, and the first thing to do in this case, even if the methodology is not yet standardized, is to develop a social hotspot analysis. The social hotspot analysis gives us an overview of the social hotspots that we have on the production chain or on sector. We could use for this kind of analysis secondary data from databases, for example. And our idea was to build up a social hotspot analysis for the entire Europe in order to understand in the sector of the waste management where we have social hotspot and which social teams have the highest impacts. So the idea is that our results could be a starting point in order to assess the appropriate selection of the subcategories, considering the European country. Because as you could imagine, of course, when we are talking about social impacts, the geography is very important. So we decided to have 3 different points of views. It's not common for social LCA have different actors. Usually we develop social LCA with the databases, but we decided to use databases and also the expertise of practitioners, for example, from municipal solid waste managers that have idea on the possible impact that the plans of the sector could have on society. But also, and more important, we decide to understand in which way this kind of plant impacts society from an opinion point of view. Because, of course, we know that when we are talking about waste management plants, there's a strong opposition from society. Usually, local communities are really scared, for example, from landfill and incineration plant, and this is, of course, very understandable, but these kind of methodologies could give some answers to the stakeholders in order to let them understand that not only the environmental but also sometimes social impacts related to the realization of this kind of plant will give important improvements in the economy of that specific sites. So the idea is, as I was saying, to have a turning point, improving the methodology inside the application of the waste management field to increase the social perception of this type of plant. So to give them answers that are related to the specific methodology results in order to let them understand which impacts are true and which impacts are not true. Also, this could be really important for realization of the project, because we know that, for example, the latest case is the case of the incineration plant in Rome, where the strong opposition led the plant delay. The delay of the realization is really important because the community do not want this type of plants, and there's no answer actually from the managers that want to realize it, because of course we have environmental data, but we do not have this kind of analysis yet. So we have our first results on the social hotspot analysis. We developed the results through the use of the PSILCA database, that is one of the two most important databases for the development of social LCA analysis. It is based on a multi-regional input-output database, so it is based on economical exchange, and it covers 200 countries and almost 15 sectors, 15,000 sectors. This is the general scheme that the database uses. So we have, for example, the worker stakeholder category. We have the subcategories that you see as child labor, forced labor, paid salary, working time, discrimination, and so on and so forth. And then we have the different indicators and the data that the databases use. One important things to keep in mind is that, for example, the databases used country-level data that are quantitative in some cases. But if you check, for example, worker rights, that is the last subcategories, we have qualitative data. We have a score, ordinal score on a scale of 0 to 3. This is because inside the developers of the database do not want to quantify everything, do not want to have a strong quantification of the impact, so they decide to use scale to have some idea on the possible impacts of that specific subcategories. The database is organized in sectors, and each sector could be referred to a specific country. So our idea was to develop the analysis for all the European countries in order to have the social hotspot analysis of the European country where we are talking about the waste management sector. But the organization of the database is based on the NACE revision 2, that is the Eurostat division for economic activities. And inside the database, the sector about waste management is also put it together with the sewage and remediation side. So the product system is the sewage, refuse disposal, sanitation, and similar activities, because the sector is divided at the European level in this way. So inside our analysis, we have the social impacts of for the different countries, of the waste disposal, of the sewage treatment, and of remediation activities. We refer this sector to the different countries, and we use the standard functional unit that is present inside the database, that is $1. So we are referring to the evaluation of social impact for $1 of treatment. It is for the sewage, for the refuse disposal, and for the sanitation activities. We had some problem at the beginning because some countries are not present inside the database. We do not have data, for example, for Luxembourg, Croatia, Bulgaria, and Cyprus. So we decided to eliminate these countries because it's not possible to evaluate the social hotspot of these countries without any data. And then we decide to aggregate the sector in Denmark because inside the database, the Denmark have the possibility to have three different sectors, and we decided to put together all the results of the three different sectors, because otherwise we will have one country that have the specific sector and the other ones that are referring to the general sector. So we decided to take the average of the three sectors because otherwise we could encounter a travel counting problem because sometimes indicators refer to the country level and not to the specific industry. Another analysis that we performed is the differences in the application of the cutoff. When we work on the database, we could select different cutoffs for the analysis, and the cutoffs are on the input to our system. So the higher the cutoff, the higher the number of inputs inside our production chain is considered. The lower we have inside as an input of our process. The unit of measure of social impacts in the Circa database is the medium risk hour, so 1 hour of medium risk for the workers. You can see in the graph differences with summing up all the indicators for the different cutoff. So we have the lowest cutoff with the medium risk hour, total medium risk hour of 8, and the higher cutoff with the 14 as the final results. So we decided to take the highest cutoff because otherwise we will, of course, not really estimate the problems. Usually, when we are speaking about social LCA impact, we have two possibilities to evaluate the impacts, but the most used one is the reference scale. So we try to evaluate, considering a reference scale, the possible impacts. Inside the database, the impacts factor related to the impact assessment method, that is the way in which the database took the data, treat it, and then give us the results. Usually, for example, the database takes 1 hour of very high risk and converted it into medium risk hour. Doing so, we consider like 1 hour of very high risk, it's 100 hours of medium risk. So usually this factor that you see on the bottom is the number that we multiply for that specific step of the risk. So if we have a high risk and 1 hour of high risk, it becomes 10 hours of medium risk hours. But this is the impact factor that we use inside the database. When we have to elaborate a scale in order to assess the final results that the database gives, we need to, of course, create steps. So I decided to decrease the higher step because the database refers to the general, to a global scale. So we have some countries that, of course, have highest impact, and the very high indicators, it's not really relevant in the case of Europe because we do not have really high social impacts. If we, for example, keep as last value of the step 100, we could see that in the next slide we will not have any indicators that have this value. So we decided to decrease the higher number in order to be more understandable where are the highest impact inside the supply chain. So we made this decision decreasing the two higher step of the scale. This is the first results that we have. As you can see, the table is related to the different countries of Europe, to the stakeholder categories that you can see on the top. In this case is the local community, and then for each stakeholder category, we have the different subcategories. In this case, for example, we have access to material resources, respect of indigenous rights, safe and healthy living condition, local employment, migration, GHG footprint, environmental footprint, and contribution to economic developments. These are the results that the database gives us with the cutoff considered and with the different scale level that we decided for the analysis. So as you can see, it seems, for example, that for the local community, the subcategories access to material resources in all Europe is one of the hotspots. What we consider, for example, access to material resources, it's basically resource depletion. So, for example, the use of petroleum, or the use of biomass, or the use of water, or the use of soil. So it seems that in Europe, when we are talking about a local community and social impact of the waste management sector, we have some problems related to to the access to material resources. As you can see, of course, depending on the different countries, we have very different results. But in Europe, for example, we have good level of environmental footprint because if we do a comparison global-wide, of course, we could see that the database for Europe, the value that give us the database are really low compared, for example, to other countries. This is the results that we have for workers. We have almost the same situation. We have a subcategory that have the highest impact, that is the fair salary. So it seems that one of the biggest problems related to the sector when we speak about workers is the fair salary for most of the countries. And on the other side, also we have some problems related to the worker rights. Of course, the idea is that this kind of results will give us a specific idea on each social hotspot that we have in the different countries. So the idea is that the practitioner could take these results and says, okay, if I have to select the subcategories that I have to analyze for my specific case study, for example, a specific case study of application to a specific plant, we could use this information in order to select which subcategories we need to evaluate. This is the results for the value chain actors. We could see that, for example, in the Italian case study, that is almost, I don't have to point to, but Italy is almost in the middle, we have some problems related to the corruptions and the promotion of social responsibility. This could be done could be, for example, related to the criminal activity related to the waste management sector, but also problem connected with the legal system inside with the corruption system of the waste management and also the wastewater management. For society, the impacts are not that high, unfortunately, and we almost have the same results for each country. We have some, this is an important result actually, because the main issue when we are speaking about when we are speaking of waste management plans, usually that society in general is scared by the realization of these plans, but actually we could see from this data that we do not have a real hotspot on the team. So there's not a real indicator that give us an idea that this kind of activity, this kind of sector in each specific country will have important impact in the society context. Some conclusion, we keep this as our first results of the social hotspot, that is the opinion and the results from the social LCA expert that developed the database, and me as an expert of social LCA applying and running the database. But we also want to collect the point of view of municipal solid waste practitioners and the stakeholders. We will do this through a questionnaire, for example, from that is going on for the expert of municipal solid waste management, and we will evaluate reports on the NIMBY syndrome for the stakeholder point of view. The future development of this project is to have an idea on the possible guidelines to select the stakeholder categories that at the moment is one of the biggest problems when we are trying to apply the methodology to specific case studies. And we want to develop something that could give some answer in the selection processes. We will also have the implementation of a real case study for the application of the social LCA in the waste management sector, of course. And then we will try to develop a strategy to find a way to put together the results of LCA, social LCA and LCC in life cycle sustainability assessment. Thank you.